Hello everyone, my name is Harrison Canning. I'm a neurotechnology consultant. I also have a YouTube channel called the BCI Guys where I make content about brain-computer interfacing and neurotechnology. And today I'm going to be talking about giving you all a broad overview of neurotechnology and then also talking about how to pitch your idea for the hackathon. And first of all, good luck to everyone with the hackathon. It should be a lot of fun. I love these types of events, so I'm excited to give you a video and hopefully talk to some of you as you are going through this. So just an overview of what I will be talking about. We are going to start from the very beginning of what neurotechnology is, talk about some broad categories of devices and ways that neurotechnologies are used, and some of the applications as well so that you can see them applied and maybe come up with some own ideas of what you might want to do. We'll then talk about choosing an idea through the biodesign method, which is a method that a lot of medical device companies use when trying to create innovation. It came out of Stanford, I believe. And then we'll go through some techniques for pitching an idea that you'll be able to apply to this project, both in the ways that you're thinking about constructing the information, but then, of course, for the presentation in the end. So let's just start with the question of what is neurotechnology. So neurotechnology devices, I guarantee no matter what level of background information you're coming in, that you've interacted with neurotech in some way. So there are neuroimaging devices like this, like for example, an MRI scanner. There are electrodes that sit on top of your scalp called EEG, which you may have seen in neurodiagnostics. Cochlear implants are considered neurotechnologies because they integrate and talk to the neurons in our ear. Prosthetic arms that are able to open and close or move fingers based on signals that you're getting from the brain or muscles is considered neurotechnology. And even pacemakers. Pacemakers are the most common form of neurotech, with hundreds of thousands being implanted worldwide, if not millions. I should check that statistic. But the official definition of neurotechnology is a technology that records, stimulates, or works with the brain and nervous system to influence how researchers understand the brain and consciousness, supplement, engage, or monitor the nervous system, or allow a user to influence the functioning of a machine from brain function. I wrote a really long definition there. I should put some periods in, but you get the idea. So neurotechnology is really quite broad. There are a lot of ways that you can think of or create technologies within this field. It could be something as simple as an app, or it could be something that's actually physically interfacing with the nervous system. So let's talk about some broad categories of neurotechnology. So one is neuromodulation. And so neuromodulation is about affecting or changing the firing patterns of neurons in some ways for neurotherapeutic purposes. So on the left, you see something called TMS. This is non-invasive. You're using electromagnetic coils to produce electromagnetic fields. And what that is doing is you're broadly having neurons either inhibit or be more excitatory, so fire or not fire. And that can be useful for a whole bunch of different purposes, like anxiety and depression as examples. So this has been used in a lot of mental health research. It's also been used for motor research, so to research muscles. For example, you can stimulate one area and make a finger flick or something like that. There are a lot of ideas that this could be used to project images into the brain or something like that in the future. Then on the right, we see a version that is invasive. So this means it's actually going into the brain, called DBS, deep brain stimulation. And that is used in a lot of movement disorders like Parkinson's, and also in severe cases of depression. So the concept with both of these, again, is that you are influencing or directing the ways that neurons are firing to help overcome some sort of neurological malady that you're trying to address. So you might think of devices in that range that might be useful. We saw an image before, but neuroimaging or neuromonitoring devices like magnetoencephalography on the left, which is detecting magnetic fields caused when neurons are firing and exchanging ions when they have these electrical impulses going through them. And then, of course, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, which is looking at the structural patterns of the brain. So this is used for diagnostic purposes, but there are lots of different technologies floating around there. If you're interested, you might think of something in that range. And then we have neurofeedback and neuromarketing. So neurofeedback is sort of like a brain-computer interface, which we'll talk about in a second, but it is taking in brain data and changing something in this, something that you're looking at, something that you're interacting with, to try to get you to change the ways that you're thinking about that. So for example, if you, a common example of neurofeedback is trying to meditate. So a neurofeedback device or system that you might think of is, let's say when you relax, a balloon or something goes up in the air. So the neurofeedback machine is reading your brain waves and noticing when you're more relaxed, it makes that balloon go up. And then in doing so is training you to be able to have that relaxation skill when you're not doing the neurofeedback. So that's neurofeedback. And then neuromarketing is analyzing brain data when you're looking at an ad, for example, or playing a video game, and determining what your emotional response was when you were looking at that, or how engaged you were, and then using that to actually affect and change video games or ads, whatever it is. Then we have cognitive assessment and enhancement. So Lumosity, the Lumosity app, you may have seen, is used for people to try to improve tests usually associated, or improve cognitive skills usually associated with IQ tests. And so you go through, you play a bunch of games, it assesses where your cognitive abilities are, again, within like the measuring it in an IQ spectrum. And then it gives you games that you progress through to try to improve on these skills. And so that's an app. It's not interfacing with the nervous system in any way, but I would still consider that to be a neurotechnology. Then we also have consumer neurostimulation devices that you can see over on the right. And this is just an example of cognitive enhancement. So maybe you don't have a malady or so you don't have something going wrong, but maybe you want to have better memory or better focus or something like that. And there are a lot of devices that claim to do that. So that's another potential category that you could look into. And then finally, the one that we usually talk about the most, and I'll give you a bunch of examples of, is brain-computer interfacing. So this is where you are using brain signals to actively try to control something external to you. So that could be in the example on the left, actually in both examples, someone is trying to type. In the example on the right, they are imagining moving a cursor around on the screen, then they can select letters. So again, the output is they're sending text, they're typing. And the one on the left, I believe, was imagined handwriting, but doesn't matter. In the end, they both get to, I'm imagining doing something and I am controlling an output. I'm moving that cursor around. I am putting text out. And so this is what the area of brain-computer interfacing is. So there are lots of different devices for brain-computer interfacing that you might want to be aware of. These are by no means all of them. These are just interacting. These ones here are just interacting with electrical impulses. But there are three broad ways to categorize neurotechnologies. So we have invasive, semi-invasive, and non-invasive. So non-invasive are these ones that you'll see here on the outside, these EEG sensors. So they don't require surgery. You just put them on top of the scalp. And generally, the signal quality that you'll get with those is lower. It's more broad than the other ones. So in the middle, we have electrocorticography, ECOG, which is sitting on top of the brain. So it's not actually penetrating brain tissue, which is why it's considered semi-invasive, but it is under the skull. And that's kind of a middle ground in signal quality between EEG and then on the other end, microelectrode arrays up here, which can give you sometimes individual spikes. So that means you can listen to one or very small groups of neurons firing, or LFPs, which is a small group data that you're getting. And so generally, as you go more invasive, the devices have more risks, although that's not always true. And then the signal quality goes up as you're going in. But really, if you want to listen to broad signals, EEG may be good for your purposes. And so I'm just going to very, very quickly run through a bunch of GIFs that show potential applications of brain-computer interfacing, although these are all within the realm of research. And if you are not actually building a device, if you're thinking of an idea, if you're in that camp for this hackathon, I highly recommend that you try to go even beyond this as to what these technologies can do. So this is showing someone typing using non-invasive brain-computer interface. They're looking at these letters, which emits a certain signal in their brain that can then be picked up. They know which letter they're looking at. This is from a company called Control Labs, which was acquired by Meta. They are reading, you see this little wristband that they're wearing. This is reading electrical impulses from the muscles, which is controlling these fingers. You can see some really accurate movement. This is planning to be used on or in tandem with VR, so to be able to very accurately map those fingers in 3D space. Here is an example of drone control. Here's one with an exosuit. So very, very early stage, but this person is imagining moving himself forward using the brain-computer interface to direct that exosuit to actually help him walk forward, even though he's paralyzed from the waist down. Here is an example of video games. So imagining moving forward, it looks like the other options are left and right using EEG, that non-invasive sensing modality. And so you can see that it's being used for a video game. This is a pretty famous clip that came out a couple years ago from Neuralink. There's a chip in this monkey's brain, and he's actually just very casually playing Pong while getting a sip of smoothie. And you can see that that's pretty accurate. And here's some amazing examples of prosthetic control. So this guy, Buzz, is controlling 2 arms just by thinking about it, and you can see is using a knife and fork very well to actually feed himself. I'm running through these very quickly, but you can just search brain-computer interface applications and find a lot more of these. This is pretty cool. This is using neurostimulation. So they are stimulating an area of this subject whose name is Nathan. They're stimulating an area of Nathan's brain associated with sensation in fingers. And what he's doing here is he's actually telling the researcher which finger is being touched, even though he's blindfolded. So this is really interesting for if you're interested in restoring senses. So for someone who may be blind or may be deaf or may not have sensation due to paralysis, you could build devices that stimulate the brain in specific patterns to give those back. Or if you are, or if you're interested in this, you could also think of this as we want to project images into the brain, or maybe you can stimulate to try to have some cognitive enhancement effect. So that's a possibility as well. More prosthetic control, just so you can see how accurate that is. And hopefully this is an idea that can be expanded upon. And cursor control again. One of the biggest and fastest growing sections of neurotechnology for non-invasive purposes and just general consumer use is, of course, gaming. This is OpenBCI's Gallia headset, which has a whole host of sensors for the face and the brain, but it is just one of a great many VR integrated gaming headsets. So keep an eye out for those. If that's something you're interested, you could go into that route. But yeah, so I've just shown you a lot of GIF examples, but to kind of wrap all of that up, here are 10 broad applications that I can think of, and these of course can be split down. So we've talked about diagnostic purposes. This could be something like actually looking into the brain with neuroimaging and seeing a structural issue. But it could even be, you could kind of be creative and think about this in another way. Like I recently saw at a museum, at the MIT museum, I saw that they had these keyboards out, and based on your typing over time, it could be used as a diagnostic tool for someone with Parkinson's. And so that could be a diagnostic method that you wouldn't necessarily think of. We talked about neurofeedback, trying to teach yourself how to think differently by taking that active monitoring and changing something that you're looking at on screen or in some sort of an experience. ERP detection, so I didn't go over this. This is a little bit more of a complicated topic, but ERPs are detectable waves that happen when you experience something or when you have a certain thought pattern. So those can be used to do things like type, for example. So what sometimes people will do is they'll flash a bunch of letters up on the screen, and let's say I want to do the letter R. When R comes up, my brain gets excited, and they can use that ERP to detect the signal. I'm not going to go into more depth than that. Neuromarketing, we talked about looking at brain signals to try to improve, to try to figure out where, like what parts of an ad are effective, or a video game, and improve upon that. Computer control we've seen. Focus and relaxation is a very common one. Emotion detection could be used for both medical purposes, but I've also heard in gaming, someone had an idea to try to make a horror game as scary as possible, which has its own ethical stuff, but make a horror game as scary as possible and just kind of look to see when you were just relaxed enough to bring that jump scare out. We've talked about cognitive enhancement, trying to figure out how we can improve an already healthy brain or overcome some maladies in brains that aren't healthy. We've talked about many device control, like you've seen those prosthetic arms. And then neural intervention is just another way of saying neuromodulation. So using technologies to overcome malfunctioning neural circuits with technology. So I'm just going to go over two types of non-invasive neurotech. And so this is most relevant if you are actually working with the technology in this hackathon. So the first one is, of course, electroencephalography, or EEG. This is the simplest to get started with. It's been around for about 100 years, which is crazy at this point, and is still used quite widely. There are a lot of consumer devices that are out there now too, because it's pretty cheap to work with. I imagine a lot of you that are actually building a prototype may be using EEG. So it's the most common, it's very cheap. It detects electrical potentials in neurons on a very, very small scale, on a millivolt scale. This high temporal resolution means that it picks up those signals very quickly, but it's not able to be very specific. So it can't detect with a high degree of specificity. We refer to the signals that come off of EEG as brain waves, and there are lots of techniques where I'm going to assume if you are working with this that you can go through and find these different techniques, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But I've seen EEG being used for diagnostic purposes, typing, motion controls, that's like in those video games, emotion detection, sleep analysis, and using surprise and the detection of certain thoughts that are like the certain decision making thoughts as is used in a brain-computer interface. So that's pretty common. This is what EEG waves look like, skipping through that. And then the other one that I'll talk about is electromyography, or EMG, which is very similar, except that it's looking for muscle pulses as opposed to brain signals. So you can see we get a very clear signal here of when someone is flexing their arm. So we're dealing with a little bit bigger signals, also cheap and pretty easy to use. Here's an example of my business partner, Colin, the other BCI guy, using a headset from OpenBCI to open and close this prosthetic hand there. And one more that I'll talk about that we see popping up more and more, at least like getting cheaper, more usable by consumers, is functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or FNIRS. And what this is doing is it's sensing changes in your hemodynamic response, which is blood flow within the brain. So when we see that an area has used up a lot of blood or had a lot of blood sent to it, and taken energy from that blood, taken oxygen from that blood, we see a difference in the brain in that area, and you can say, okay, if there's a difference here, this probably means that brain area was active, it needed energy, so it took that out from the blood. So you can look at that, and that helps us get a little bit deeper, and is often helpful in being a little bit more specific with the areas that it's targeting from. And TMS we talked about before, electromagnetic stimulation of the brain. I think some exciting future applications of this, in addition to mental health and chronic pain treatment, could also be trying to stimulate senses. So if you're thinking of something along those lines, you may want to look into TMS. And ultrasound is using sound waves, compression waves, to heat up small areas of neurons at the time in a space, which cause them to fire. Okay, so that was a broad overview of neurotechnology. A little plug, we have created a course, we meaning my business partner Colin and I, in collaboration with Neurotech have created a course called Foundations of Neurotechnology, which you can find by Googling that, which goes over all of these topics in a lot more depth if you are looking to expand upon one or two areas that you see in here. And here's just, you can find our channel at the BCI Guys. Okay, so that we've gone over what neurotechnology is, but now I want to go over how to actually come up with an idea, or at least give you some advice on coming up with an idea for this. And I'm going to use something called the biodesign process, which is a vetted process. I think it was invented in the early 2000s, but it's specifically for innovators in the medical device space to identify when to identify where a problem is and what devices can be used for that. So I'm not going to go through all of this. In fact, we're just going to go through the first three of these, but I want you to know that this is a broader system. There's a book on this. There's a whole process that will take you through the process of how do we identify a problem all the way to turning this into a business. But like I said, we're just going to focus on the first three, which may help you come up with an idea. So in this needs finding phase, what they're really looking for, or what you'd be looking for if you go through this process, is where is there an opening right now where there's a potential for neurotechnologies to help out, but where there aren't, where the needs of that area are not adequately met, and maybe neurotechnologies can help out with that. And so normally what would happen in this stage, if you're going through the traditional biodesign process, is people would do weeks and months of research. They would talk to people within this market. So if it was people with brain tumors, for example, they would talk to patients, they talk to caregivers, and they would talk to doctors related to that. Of course, you don't have that time right now, and it would be better for you to use that time into researching the devices. So what I would recommend for this is look around in your group, see what the interests are and the backgrounds that everyone has, and you might notice that, and see too within that network if there are any like areas of passion that people might have. So maybe someone in your group has someone in their family with Parkinson's, and so they're really interested in if there are any neurotechnology solutions that may be helpful. So you go around for that, you find that need, and you really start to explore it. And you can just do that with research, whether it's skimming articles or looking at videos or whatever. I recommend doing that phase and identifying where is this real problem, because it's going to help you make that pitch a lot stronger if you are developing a device specifically for that, as opposed to, oh, I just had this random idea. I think it helps put that story together a lot better. So in the needs screening process, it's what I was just talking about. You are doing that research and you're making sure that this is a real problem and we can find a real solution for it. And that's what this stage 3 is for. I recommend, if you've gone through this and you've selected on a couple problems that you like, just doing a few exercises where you set a timer for 10 minutes, you have people throwing out ideas, you work over that, and then once you have an idea, you should go back and try to think within the framework of the problem that you're trying to identify. Does this actually help out with the issue? Okay, so obviously that is a lot more in depth. There are books, there are entire courses taught on that, but you can just use those steps, and you might want to actually go back and screenshot this, use these steps to help you come up with an idea. But now let's talk about how to make a good pitch, which can also just be applied to just how to talk about this in general. So this could be pitching it to your other team members that this is the idea that you want to go for. But I've really structured this for how to present this overall at the end of the hackathon. So a pitch is really just a persuasive argument. I like to think of it as a narrative where you're stringing different components together. You're trying to find shared experience and try to convey value to the audience. And so the audience might not be your potential customer. Let's use that Parkinson's example again. The person in the audience might not have Parkinson's or know someone with it, but you want to try to find a way that's using good information and a clear story and narrative that makes them interested in the topic as well. So the elements of a good pitch deck, and I recommend, even though for a hackathon it's not that you're necessarily pitching at the end, I still recommend putting in most of these elements into your presentation, because I think that it really helps tie everything together. So obviously you want an introduction, you want a problem statement. So what is that need actually that we just talked about? What are we trying to solve for? We'll talk about, normally you would talk about market size, so how much money is in this space, but for this, you can just talk about who the users would be and maybe an estimate on how big that audience is. So for example, if you're going for gaming, you could look at statistics on how large the gaming industry is and say, based on these assumptions, we think, and these assumptions and this information, we think this many people would use our device. You talk about what that solution is. To the extent that you can, really try to get into those technical details. So do a little bit of research about the technologies that you're looking to deploy, put that in there. You're going to talk about why this is valuable, and then very importantly, the impact that this will create. So if we're talking about gaming, again, we can say that integrating X neurotechnology will make the experience way more immersive. It will bring people together to play games together. And then you have the closer, which should relate to your initial argument in the introduction. And so what I'm going to do is I just put together a few slides from a fictional company, EMGo. I'm not going to go through and pitch the whole thing like I would, but I'm just going to go through points that you should hit as we go through this. So in the introduction, this is the very start of your narrative. And so you'd probably start that on your title slide, and then which is just talking about what the company, or in this case, what your idea and team wants to do, but then ease into your problem statement. So in your introduction, you want to try to find a narrative and a hook. So that hook is going to be maybe it could be something like a story or a statistic that gets people involved from the beginning, because that first 30 seconds is very important. Make sure that you know the audience you're speaking to. So everyone in this pitch competition has probably, around intermediate understanding of neurotechnologies or more. And so just think about that and how you're talking about it. You want to make sure that this is understandable. Emotional appeals are great, especially if you're doing a medical technology. But even if you're not, just trying to relate it to an experience that people can understand. So medical technology would be great if it's someone that they can relate to, explaining this experience, and something that people could understand is maybe you take them through what it's like to be playing X video game. And then you talk about the experience that your product delivers, that the idea delivers, but you don't want to give the idea away yet. So you just want to talk about what it does, but not what it is, not the technical details. So this problem statement is very similar to that needs exploration that we were talking about. So you're just going to go through who is affected, what is the problem, and if you can, talk about how many people, and that there aren't adequate solutions right now. So in this theoretical example, what I've brought up here is a statistic that shows how many people are dealing with severe paralysis, which could be due to injury or ALS or muscular dystrophy in the United States. And so what I would recommend doing with this pitch is talking about what that actually means for the people and the caregivers going through that. So trying to paint a picture of the loss of independence, the burden on the family, all of these things, just showing that this is a real problem that 7 million people are facing every single day in this example. And so one mock example is that I read as I was researching this is someone with ALS, when they were given an assistive device to talk, said, "My caregiver is too rough." And now she wasn't able to speak on her own. It took until she was able to get this device to actually say that. And so you can imagine how scary that would be if you imagine yourself in that situation where you feel like you're in a situation where someone is being too rough with you and you can't speak about it. So that's just a good illustrative way to talk about that. And then going into that problem more, so you're not going to talk about market opportunity like is in this slide, which is used for traditional pitch decks, but you can just talk about how many people will be affected by this and what will this device be used for. And so now for the solution, you're just going to describe what that product or service is and how it will be used, and then, and then very specifically, how will it help solve that problem? That's obviously really important. And why should people care? Again, remembering that audience, trying to tie it back to those initial hooks and the ways that you're getting people excited. So this is just an OpenBCI headset, but we're pretending that the idea is a thought keyboard. So where you can think of different letters and they will appear on the screen using this technology. And so we can say that what this will do for people is increase communication speed, make it more widely accessible because everyone will be able to talk and use a computer. And the goal that we're saying that this fake product can do is type at 1 letter per second. And the features that it has is it can connect to multiple devices, it's highly accurate, and it's comfortable and discreet. So now you should talk about the technical details to the extent that you can. This is really going to show that you've done research or that you've put in hard work into the project that you're working on. So make sure to talk about the underlying science as much as you can. And then importantly, we're going to end with a value proposition, which I always think is the most important part of these pitch decks in general, and maybe in tandem with talking about the technical specs. And so you can just use this as a template for X population with X problem. Our product or service provides what thing, which does what, creating what improvement. So I'm going to give you an example to make that a little bit more clear. But so this is just who is it for, what does it do, and what experience is it creating. So for example, with this EMGO example, for persons with limited ability to communicate and interface with technology, so thinking about people with like ALS or muscular dystrophy, limited ability to move, EMGO has built a thought keyboard which restores freedom of communication by translating signals from brain into text. Unlike the competition's eye tracking and BCI systems, the thought keyboard can be discreetly used, intuitive, and safely set up. So what's important here is this is our audience, people with limited ability to communicate and interface with technology. What have we done? We built a thought keyboard, which, what is the experience? Restores freedom of communication, and it explains how it does it by translating signals from the brain into text. And this was just something that I added on here at the end, which is comparing it to existing solutions. In this case, eye tracking, which I'm saying is inadequate. And I explain why it's inadequate, because the thought keyboard implied, unlike those other ones, is discrete, it's intuitive, and it is safe. And so for the conclusion, you just want to tie it back to the beginning. So if you used a story in our example about 7 million daily battles, 7 million people that every day are going through the challenges of dealing with limited communication or mobility. So we can now say that the solution, or that the product or the device or the idea, whatever it is that you have, is helping to remedy some of those situations and how much of an impact that creates. Thank you for listening to this. Good luck on all of your various projects. I'm very excited to